This is Ask Lisa, a podcast to help people understand the psychology of parenting. Psychologist Dr. Lisa Damour, author of 2 New York Times best-selling parenting books, takes your questions. And I'm co-host Reena Ninan, a journalist and mom of 2. Some of what we talk about comes from raising children ourselves. Most of the time, I'll be getting answers to your parenting questions. So send your questions to Ask Lisa at drlisadamour.com. Episode 68, How Should Step-Parents Fit In? Boy, we've gotten such incredible feedback about our divorce episode last month.
I'm so glad we did that. I mean, we really scratched the surface, Reena. Marriages and divorces and co-parenting are such complex things, but I was glad that we got into it.
And I also felt it was really valuable just talking about dealing with conflict with your spouse or partner and how that can affect your kids.
Yeah, whether you're married or not.
Yeah. We got so much feedback. People were even asking, I'm a step-parent. How do I help? And we just realized we've got to do a follow-up on this, but dealing with step-parents. And this letter came in, Lisa. It says, Hello, Lisa. I have 2 stepdaughters, 8 and 5. When their dad, my husband, and their mom split up 3 years ago, Mom had full custody, but now we have full custody. They're with us during the week and with their mom during the weekend. Over the last year, their mom has been in and out, very inconsistent in all manners. When she was more consistent, the girls were well behaved. However, the past 6 months have been especially hard on the 5-year-old. I feel like some of her emotions she's taking out on me as her stepmom. As a step-parent, my husband wants me to play a parent role, especially since we have our own 2-year-old son. But I'm having a hard time determining the role of a step-parent, especially when it comes to discipline. What's your advice on a step-parent role while maintaining a parent role with your biological child, especially when you're with children and do most of the caring for the stepchildren, more so than their biological parents? Thank you. Boy, there's a lot in this letter.
There is, and it's a really complicated dynamic, right? Mm-hmm. There's an 8-year-old who's managing well, it sounds like behaviorally, 5-year-old who's having a hard time, and then this mom also has a 2-year-old who's her biological 2-year-old, and it sounds like she's sort of front line on parenting and doing a lot of the hands-on parenting, and there's a complex backstory.
So I want to ask you first, should step-parents discipline differently?
The short answer is yes. And one of the things that is a well-established principle in the world of, family life and parenting and step-parenting is that ideally the proper role of the step-parent is sort of like friendly aunt or uncle. That kind of invested adult who really cares about you, but isn't making the rules, always enforcing the rules. It's such a good metaphor, because we can all picture the, invested aunt or uncle. Like, mm-hmm. I like you, kid. I'm here to make your life better. I'm here to guide and support, but not necessarily taking lead on the harder parts of parenting. So under ideal conditions, or easier conditions than these, that's the guidance. And what I'll say is that morphs over time. I actually was largely raised by a stepfather and my mom. And my folks divorced when I was 3. And then my mom and stepfather married when I was 6. And so I've had a very long relationship with my stepfather, who I just adore. Mm-hmm. And so I remember personally how it developed over time, that in the beginning, especially aunt or uncle is a really good model. And then for a lot of kids in a lot of blended families, that fades and gives way to what feels much more like a traditional parenting relationship. Mm. But time is essential to that if you have it, though it's not clear that this letter writer has it.
Mm. And also in this, if you've got a biological parent who isn't parenting, or even if they are, if you're not on the same page, how do you deal with that?
That's really tricky, right? And even as you read the letter, there's a structural configuration in here that's hard, which is that the biological mother has the kids on the weekend, and the writer and her husband have the kids on the week, during the week. And, there's all sorts of complexities about kids going back and forth and how that feels for them. But the weeks and the weekends feel different. The weeks you're like, you got to go to bed, you got to get your homework done, you got to brush your teeth, you got to, stop messing around. And the weekends are looser and easier in family life. And so even the way this is structured, besides the fact that we've got a step-parent who's doing, it sounds like a lot of the on-the-ground parenting, even the way this is structured in the week is going to make it hard. Again, even if the biological mom were very consistent and very regular, weekend parenting looks different from weekday parenting, and the rules are different. And so it's hard for kids to be moving between those 2 times a week, and then especially when those 2 times a week map onto different behavioral expectations, right? So we can see this from all sides, like that, the kids may feel like, wow, it's kind of loose or lighter or maybe inconsistent over at mom's house on the weekends, and then we come back and here come the rules, and that's not so fun. And then the person giving us the rules isn't our mom, and yet you can also see where this step-parent is feeling like, am I going to let the 5-year-old just, have a hard time and not do anything to intervene? So it's one of those where the best way to walk up to it, and we'll really get down to business on like what this stepmom should do, is with, as little finger pointing as possible. Like everybody in this is in a tricky spot.
So what do you find? I mean, obviously, I'm sure every step-parent wants to be loved and admired and get along well with these kids, but that's not always the case. How do you work towards that relationship?
Well, it's easy when things are going well, right? It's easy when kids are behaving. And, I get the sense from this letter writer that that's sometimes been the case and that it's gone well, and this is not someone who's trying to overstep bounds. What gets really hard, and I think what, prompted this letter is, okay, but what about when the 5-year-old's out of line in front of me and I'm the only one there? And she doesn't say this, but I also think about, and then I have my own 2-year-old watching it.
Yeah.
Like I can't, even if it's like ignorable, I can't really ignore it because I'm trying to get my 2-year-old to understand what it means to be a socialized human being. And it's not going to help the situation if the 5-year-old is doing stuff that I would not allow the 2-year-old to do. So this to me feels like the crux of the matter, the really delicate moment of, I don't want to, kind of parent this 5-year-old in a way that feels heavy-handed, but I also can't let this behavior go. And it sounds like her husband has basically said, go for it, please parent the kid.
Yeah.
So here's what I would suggest, and it's not going to be perfect, but it may be a bit of a solution. The goal here is we're trying to keep the kids out of a loyalty conflict, out of a sense of, you're not my mom, you don't get to tell me what to do, and if I let you tell me what to do, I am acting as though you are my mom, which feels really bad inside because you're not my mom, and I don't want my mom to think somehow I'm putting someone else on her level or, even worse, maybe taking her place. So that's the inner psychology that we're trying to address. So the way I would have this parent consider doing this is when she's with her partner, her husband, they maybe sit with the 5-year-old and the husband says, all right, Cookie, I'm not here all the time. Your stepmom and I both care about you, and I love you like crazy. Your stepmom loves you too. She's going to be the one who's sometimes helping you make good choices. And I have asked her to do that. I know she's not your mom. She knows she's not your mom. But she's the grown-up who's here with you to keep you safe and help you make good choices. So when she's asking you to do that, it's my request. It's coming from me, your dad, and she's here to help. But something to try to push away the loyalty conflict, to let the little girl know, like, this is in some ways proxy dad, not stepmom trying to be mom. What do you think, Reena?
That's interesting. So you're having the biological parent lay that groundwork to be like, look, you like me, we need to make this work. This is my proxy. And here's why. And do you find that having that talk works with kids? I mean, because they're so emotional. The mom's even admitting this 5-year-old, the stepmom is admitting this 5-year-old is really emotional right now.
I think it does work. I think it can work. And I think the two things that are built into that spiel from the father are, first of all, just laying it out and saying directly to the 5-year-old, she's not your mom and she's not trying to be your mom. And that is what kids need to hear.
Yes.
And Reena, like, one of the, when I think about like having practiced for a long time and what have I seen, like, don't create a loyalty conflict for a kid and their parent. Like, don't do it, right? So it would not, I think, often occur to a level-headed grown-up that telling a 5-year-old to stop throwing their peas on the floor is creating a loyalty conflict.
Yeah.
But it can feel like that to the kid. And so the simple act of saying, look, I'm not your mom. I'm not trying to be your mom, but you and I both know you can't throw your peas on the floor is worth it because you take the loyalty conflict piece out of it and you just take it down to you and I both know that can't be happening. And so I'm asking you to stop. So the first part is you get the loyalty conflict out. And then the second part is this idea of, kiddo, it's about you making good choices. It's about this being a reasonable and kind grown-up who's going to help you make good choices that you can feel good about. So it stops being between the little girl and the stepmother and pushes a little bit more towards the little girl doing what she's going to feel good about for herself. And that the stepmother is the proxy actor on behalf of the father to help the child make the good choices. So it gets kind of convoluted when we say it all that way.
Yeah.
But these are small adjustments that can actually go pretty far.
We're going to pause. We're going to take a quick break. But Lisa, at the other side of this, I want to ask you about big mistakes that step-parents make in the beginning.
Reena and I have some fun news for users of Facebook. You can now subscribe and listen to the Ask Lisa podcast right on the Ask Lisa page of Facebook. Go there, click on podcast either on the mobile app or your desktop, and it will download for you every week, and you can join in a conversation with us and other listeners about each week's episode.
Welcome back to the Ask Lisa podcast. We were just talking about how do you fit in as a step-parent? And Lisa, I want to ask you, what do you find over the years you've seen that are mistakes that step-parents make in the beginning?
I think it's actually erring too much in the direction of trying to be a parent or too much in the direction of not being an adult. So actually, let's start with the not being an adult one. I think sometimes, put in that place of being a step-parent and not wanting to create a loyalty conflict, not wanting to overstep one's bounds. I've watched step-parents be entirely hands-off with kids, like not even aunt or uncle, basically like, just really, really trying to stand all the way back. And again, it's well-meaning. It comes from a place of not wanting to muddle in a way that's unhelpful. But if I picture this 5-year-old starting to really get into some behavior that is problematic, and if I picture, let's go back to the stepmother, if she does nothing or is very reserved and very removed and is like, wait till your father comes home, or whatever, it feels really weird for kids when they're doing things they know they're not supposed to do, and an adult is standing there and witnessing it and not stepping in. And so I do think it's worth step-parents trying to develop a vocabulary and a system around saying, look, I know I'm not your mom, I know I'm not your dad, but I'm a grown-up, and you and I both know that you can't be doing that, and I'm here to help you make good choices, and I'm here to keep you safe like a teacher would, right? I mean, kids are used to that idea. Like, there's lots of grown-ups who tell kids what to do who are not trying to be their parents. So putting that framework around it, I think, can be important. And then at the other extreme is, super well-meaning where the step-parent's like, isn't this wonderful? Now you have 2 dads, in addition to your mom who I married, in heterosexual, configurations here. You have 2 dads. Like, you've got your dad and now you've got me too, right?
Yeah.
There is really not a kid on the planet who's going to be like, this is great. I mean, that will feel so uncomfortable for kids.
Yeah.
So uncomfortable for kids. And again, well-meaning, but it just like steps in it from the loyalty stuff and feels terrible for the kid, and also probably doesn't feel that good for the biological, in this particular scenario, the biological dad. Like, can you imagine being in a divorce situation and having the other step parent seem to be in competition for your role? Like, that's going to take divorce, which is already so complicated and delicate, and not help the situation.
Yeah. I want to go back to this letter because, the mom is writing and asking, the stepmom here is saying the 5-year-old has emotional issues because the mom is just so inconsistent. What do you think is it the inconsistency that's causing her to be so emotional?
It could be. It could be. It's really hard for kids when parents are inconsistent. And, when you read the letter, there's something else. It's interesting that the visitation, it sounds like, changed a lot or flipped a lot. And the term full custody doesn't necessarily mean physical custody. There's like legal and physical. So it sounds like the girls still visit back and forth, but it sounds like they used to spend a lot more time with their mom, and now we're spending a lot more time with their dad. So when I hear that, I'm like, okay, something happened here. There's a backstory here that we don't need to know, but this has not been entirely straightforward as far as the visitation goes. So there's complexities. And the letter writer has a lot of information about this and probably has a lot of feelings about it, right? About what's happened. And so then she's looking at this child who, if we go with the inferences that are in the letter, is feeling uncomfortable, and very likely, perhaps, feeling uncomfortable because that child's mom is struggling in her way. Mm-hmm. And so one of the things we want to think through is, how should the step-parent position herself with regard to the real or perceived shortcomings of the biological mother, right? Like, this is a really interesting question. What do you think, Reena? Like, what would your sense be of, if you're the step-parent in this, what do you think the thoughts and feelings might be about that mom?
First, my priority would be, especially if this is a Monday through Friday arrangement, you just want things to function well in your household, right? That's just priority number one for me. But if you've got this variable that's constantly changing and there's no consistency, I don't even know where to begin. I don't want to badmouth the parent. And the child is only 5, right? They're still in elementary school. So you're...
Maybe kindergarten. That's really young, yeah.
Yeah. So I just am at such a loss. I wouldn't even know where to begin.
Okay. But what you said, it really does bring us to the reality, which is, mostly in family life, you're trying to get through the day.
Totally.
So you've got this stepmom who's trying to get through the day and has, let's just be clear, 3 children under the age of 8 on her hands, right? So she's got a lot going on, or 8 and under. So we picture the moment where maybe like it's the witching hour, dinner time is being, she's trying to get dinner on the table with or without help. And the 8-year-old may be holding it together quite nicely. The 2-year-old, is in complete wild card in this, and is probably not being helpful at dinner time. And then you've got a 5-year-old who could be helpful but isn't being helpful. And we can see where tempers might get very short and nerves might be frayed. And the 5-year-old might be doing something that at the biological mom's house is okay, but in this home is not okay. And if the step-parent were inclined to, or sometimes felt coming out of their mouth words like, you do that with your mom, but you don't do it here, or your mom, that's not okay what you're doing, and which implies like the thing you do at your mom's house is not okay, and it kind of feels like a criticism of the mom. If that were to happen, I would certainly understand it. I would not think that was a completely inexplicable outcome, but it may not be what we want. So one thing that can really help, there's a couple ways to go at this. One thing that can really help is to first remember, kids don't need their parents to be consistent with each other. So what I mean is, in 2 home situations, kids do not need the same rules in both homes, and they don't need the same expectations in both homes.
What? Really?
They really don't. They really don't.
But then aren't you setting yourself up, because then the kids are like, okay, I can get away with this at this home, and I can watch video games and eat ice cream in my underwear all day long.
Well, that is exactly how it often goes down in two-home situations. Like, there's the Disneyland home and then there's the Business Week home, and so it is it's not great, if the expectations are all over the map, because it does create this sense of, we get to be hog wild over there. Why can't we be hog wild here? And that's not ideal for kids. But what's really, really interesting is, so long as the homes are pretty consistent internally, kids are good at switching gears. And it's the same way, like they know how they're allowed to act at school, and they know how they're allowed to act at home, and they know how they're allowed to act at grandma's house, and they know how they're allowed to act at the other grandma's house, right? Like, kids are pretty good at moving across domains. And so that the other parent doesn't parent, like these two, like the stepmom and the mom don't parent in the same way, is not actually a giant problem. It's tough on the kids if the biological mom is not very consistent herself internally. If sometimes there's rules, sometimes there's not. Like, that's tough. But it's okay, or kids can manage one house having one set of rules that's very different from how you do things at the other house. But the way to help them with this without making commentary on the other house is to say things like, let me show you how we do this here.
Oh.
Let me show you how we do this here. If you're wanting, to get yourself a snack, let me show you how we do this here. Instead of rifling through the pantry and throwing it all on the floor, you can ask me and I will lay out the options, right? And so obviously at some level there's a bit of a commentary on the other family and how they do things, but it's a pretty clean way to say, like, let me remind you the context you're in. And let me just show you how you do this here. And the kid's trying to accomplish something, right? That's what we always have to remember about what we call like bad behavior. There's a goal. There's an aim. There's something they're trying to get done. And so if whoever the grown-up in charge is can try to figure out what the kid was trying to accomplish. Oh, you want my attention? Let me show you how to do this here. All you have to do is come up, put your hand on my wrist. I know that you're going to want to interrupt what I was doing. And I am, if I'm in a conversation with somebody and the second I'm free, I'm all yours. Like, give them parameters for how we do it here. The question of the mother being inconsistent over that home, that one belongs to the dad.
But what if the dad doesn't want to deal with it and it's stuck in your plate?
Well, then that's, I think, a important and probably hard conversation between the stepmom and the dad. And this is the other place where step-parents fit in. They can help with coaching and supporting the divorced parent. And especially, Reena, like, let's think about teenagers for a minute. Like, these are younger kids, but, teenagers and being, a parent who's parenting teenagers in a divorce situation, sometimes teenagers can be really spicy in that, and be really difficult in that. And so the step-parent can want to step in and be like, do not speak to your father that way or whatever. It doesn't work very well. What does work better is, that the biological parent is on the front line, and then there's a huddle where the biological parent and the step-parent can go debrief. Like, I can't believe the kid just said that. And the step-parent can say, like, yeah, I really hate watching that happen. Like, do you want to try this? Can I tell you I think you're great, even though your kid doesn't think you're so great right now? So the step-parent can help with parenting in some ways by doing backup coaching and support for the biological parent. Like, that is actually a critical role. So I could see some pretty important conversations between this thoughtful stepmom and her husband about, like, okay, I'm a little worried about how things are going down at your ex's house. What do you know? Can we think this through together? Is there any way we can better support their mom so that she can be more consistent? Is there anything we can be doing to help the situation? To the degree that something needs to be said to the girls about it, it should be coming out of the dad's mouth.
Okay.
So it's helpful to think about the step-parent being able to move around in these different roles and be supporting parenting all the while without necessarily doing super hands-on, this is coming from me and, I'm going to act like your parent right now.
So I had never thought about the coaching first off. That's really interesting as a role of a step-parent. I do want to ask you, though, about teens and college students, because I think the way you approach step-parenting must be different in those years, no?
It can be. I think a lot of it what comes down to is how new is the marriage.
Yeah.
Because, it happens sometimes, Reena, that people wait till their kids go off to college to
Right.
split up. And so that's a whole other ball of wax. But it can also happen that, these are well-established marriages. And then a lot of it comes down to, it's interesting thinking about kids going off to college. Kind of picture that moment of everybody taking the kid to college. Like, who goes? How does that look? Who's putting the dresser together? Could toes get stepped on? And I think it's so, it spins off in so many different directions. But I think it brings us to a really good principle, right, that can apply at all ages, which is all the grown-ups want the same thing. Which is for the kids to thrive.
Yeah.
And all the grown-ups have assets that they can bring to that. And if we go back to what we talked about in the divorce episode of don't talk bad about the other adults. You can affirm realities that your kids are observing, but don't start it. And if we go back to that idea of cheering for the other adults and the important place they play in that young person's life, you kind of can't get it wrong.
There's a lot to think about. Especially with blended families. What do you have for us, Lisa, for parenting to go?
For parenting to go, I want to underscore something that came up. Time is on your side. I think when people have gone through divorces and then remarriages, the wish for everything to start to look like the Brady Bunch, with this blended family where everybody is having a blast and it's all kind of cute. I think it can feel like there's a wish to rush to that position, or one can speed one's way to it. And in my experience, being respectful and cautious and moving slowly sets things up quite nicely down the line. And that development is long, parenting is complicated. If a step-parenting relationship is underway, play the long game. Trust that over time, the relationships will be established and trust will be established. And you really can't speed it up. Time is your best asset here.
Patience. It's a great reminder. Sometimes it's in short supply, but play the long game. It can really pay off.
Yeah.
Next week, join us for an encore episode, Lying, Sneaking, Cheating. What keeps kids from being honest? I'll see you next week, Lisa.
I'll see you next week, Reena.
Thanks for joining us. Be sure to subscribe to the Ask Lisa podcast so you get the episodes just as soon as they drop. And send us your questions to asklisa@drlisadamore.com. And now a word from our lawyers. The advice provided on this podcast does not constitute or serve as a substitute for professional psychological treatment, therapy, or other types of professional advice or intervention. If you have concerns about your child's well-being, consult a physician or mental health professional. If you're looking for additional resources, check out Lisa's website at drlisadamore.com. We'll see you next week.